why Zoe loves this game so much. It's just a Donkey Kong clone.
No, it bloody isn't. It's a unique game with its own special charm.
Aha! I knew that would get you to finally come to work. Now play this pile of crap and tell us all about it.
This thing is a bit strange, isn't it? I mean, it really does stand out. The bright red case for the start. How many other games have a bright red case on the PlayStation 2? Well, one that I can think of, Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec. If you got it from the Fire Pack, which is the PlayStation 2 plus Gran Turismo 3 together in one box, then it is in a red box. But it does stand out from the crowd, which raises one question. Does it count as an official part of the PS2 library? There's no black bar across the top of the inlay, the obvious indicator of a PS2 game. Instead, we have a bit of text saying, for PlayStation 2, followed by an obnoxiously 90s looking 100% unofficial logo, which is designed in such a way that suggests the makers were actually proud of this fact. On the back we have text saying this product is not sponsored, endorsed or approved by Sony. So here we have a game that is definitely not part of the 100% official library of PS2 games, but I still think it counts from the point of view of a full collector's set, if you know what I mean, where collectors will go for everything that was produced. So I suppose that answers my question. But now that we've answered that, we kind of have to play it, don't we? And see what this thing is all about. This is a low-budget collection of 10 titles that would not look out of place on an old Flash Games website. We've got no original ideas here, it's all copies of something that you've seen thousands of times before. There's Jetpack 2, a crappy maze game, Paddle Panic, an Arkanoid clone, Super Powershot, a bouncing ball puzzle that crosses Buster Move with something like Puzznick, Invaders, which calls itself From Above, because of course the titles keep changing. It's a Space Invaders clone, as in it's literally Space Invaders, only it was unlucky enough to get cloned onto this disc. Then there's Chopper 2 The Return, which is Flappy Bird. Loop the Loop is Kicks, only not as much fun, while Pop-'em is Pang, or Buster Brothers if you're American. Next up we have Dragon Tiles 3, although where you'll find the previous two games is a mystery to me. Almost as much of a mystery as why you would ever want to play this sliding tile puzzle game on a PlayStation 2. After that we have Bounty Hunter, or Bounty Hunter X, another one that can't decide what it's called. It's a side-scrolling shooter. And finally we have Proxima, which is Uridium. No joke, it is Uridium. Take a look. Uridium is a famous side-scrolling shoot-'em-up where you blast your way across a space dreadnought, taking out its fighter escort so the way is clear to land on the ship and trigger a devastating explosion. It's widely regarded as an absolute classic, and I reviewed it on this show years ago. Meanwhile, Proxima is a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up where you blast your way across a space platform, taking out a fighter escort, while wishing you were playing Uridium instead. There's no two ways about it, this is Uridium. They cloned one of the best shoot-'em-ups on home computers and thought that we would not notice. The thing is, while Uridium had style and an absolutely fantastic title tune, this has a generic turn-of-the-century club beat soundtrack and clunky gameplay. Apparently, there are sound effects and music on the game itself, but only if you're playing the GameCube version. But here on the PS2, we've got no such luck. Every game on the PS2 version has generic background music and no sound effects. As for the gameplay, it's not great. I can usually complete the first couple of levels of Uridium, but it's a challenge. Meanwhile, I defeated all of the enemies in Proxima, and then couldn't work out what to do next because you can't land on anything and there seems to be no level exit. Back to the menu. Paddle Panic is an Arkanoid or Breakout clone with a difference. There are lots of blocks to break, but the game doesn't make it clear whether you have to actually break them or not. Instead, it tells you to get a ball to a certain room, a room with a heart in it, and hit the heart with the ball. So I assume that you have to break the ones on the outside of the screen so that you can make way to the next screen? Who knows? Anyway, you win when you hit all 4 hearts. The thing is, I'm not entirely sure how you would get to those hearts. I think it's about breaking the blocks on the outside, so what are the ones on the inside for? Whenever the ball flies off the screen, you do get to see a map, but you can't change your location when you're seeing the map. So maybe you have to break all the blocks just to get access? I really don't know. But what I do know is that even if you are trying to hit them all, you're not going to hit all of the blocks because the controls suck. This is the kind of game that excels on analog controllers, but like all games on this collection, you're actually forced to use the D-pad for movement. It's like the game is actually fighting you. If you hold the D-pad for too long, you will miss the ball and it'll just fly off to the map screen again. It's so frustrating. This could easily have been a fun game, but the choice to make everything D-pad controlled absolutely kills it. Let's just move on. Super Powershot is a weird game that feels like a cross between snooker and breakout. You choose the direction you're going to fire the ball in and then hope you've given it enough power to destroy more than one block, otherwise you're in for a very tedious time. It's a rather colourful game, but it's also so slow and consequently not at all fun. All you need to do is navigate around collecting stars while fighting the urge to turn the game off and do something more interesting. So it's crap. What's next? Invaders or
From Above!
If you decide to follow what the in-game title actually says, is Space Invaders. It's no two ways about it, it's Space Invaders. It's not a bad Space Invaders. You could easily while away a few hours playing this one, if you didn't already have a copy of Space Invaders on another legitimate compilation disc, such as the Taito ones where they actually put out Space Invaders. Yeah, I'll give this one a pass. It's fun enough and it may actually be the best game on the entire disc. But that's really the issue, isn't it? If Space Invaders clones are the best you've got, and Space Invaders is already available, what's the point of releasing another one? Let's see what's up next. I was really hoping this would be some kind of Choplifter sequel, since that would have actually been a fun game. Choplifter is a great title on the Master System and that I've spent hours upon hours on. It's really worth giving a try. But unfortunately, Chopper 2 is not a Choplifter clone. Instead, it's Flappy Bird. Yes, I know Flappy Bird came later than this title, so it's not technically Flappy Bird as in a Flappy Bird clone, but let's face it, when you look at Chopper 2 and how all you have to do is press a button to prevent the helicopter going too far down the screen, you're going to think of Flappy Bird, rather than the slew of old type-in games that had exactly the same core mechanic. What's next? In Loop La Loop, you play as a lion that has to draw a box around enemies while avoiding some hazards and collecting some fruit. It's Nokia's Snake crossed with kicks. The controls are decent and the gameplay is fairly straightforward. I actually found myself enjoying this one, but then again I do like kicks, and I always found it odd that so few games have developed that style of gameplay further. So yeah, I'll give this one a pass. It's not bad, and the addition of collectible fruit actually mixes the game up enough to be fairly interesting. Is it enough to warrant you getting this collection? Probably not. Pop-'em is the game I was looking forward to the most on this collection. I've been a fan of Pang since I first played it in an arcade down in Great Yarmouth back in the 90s. Pang is a fiendish dodge and shoot platform game that I always wished got a proper port to the Amstrad CPC. Yes, I know it was on GX4000 and the Amstrad Plus, but I'm talking about the proper CPC. Pop-'em takes the basic idea from Pang and completely screws it up. Your character is too large relative to the balls that you're going to be shooting, and the size range on the balls changes too quickly. So it goes from a reasonable sized threat to a tiny, faster moving threat in only a couple of shots. Whereas Pang has a proper battle of attrition that is so much better. As a result, this game just feels too easy and too cramped at the same time. It's a poor copy of Pang, and it's a severe disappointment. Dragon Tile 3 sucks. It's a sliding tile puzzle, the kind of puzzle that you used to get in party bags when you went to your friends' birthday parties in the 80s. I was never the kind of kid who enjoyed these things, and now I'm older, I still don't like them. However, for what it's worth, The game plays well enough, the controls are decent, and the graphics have just that right balance between being too simple to make the puzzle enjoyable or too busy to make the game comprehensible. If you're into sliding tower puzzles, this one is probably okay. Not that it justifies being on the PlayStation 2, however. It's not exactly pushing the processor power to perfection, is it? That's for sure. Also, the gaudy animated background could easily give you a headache. So what's next? Bounty Hunter, or Bounty Hunter X, if the title screen is to be believed, is a simple side-scrolling shoot-'em-up. You play as a jet fighter and your mission is to shoot fish and other aquatic creatures. No, the game does not explain why an aircraft is underwater, and yes, I did ask it. Some enemies die in one hit, while others take several shots, and you can collect coins to buy power-ups. If the game wasn't so obnoxious with its bulletproof swordfish enemies, this one might be enjoyable. Sadly, it's not. I'm serious, these swordfish take so many hits. They might as well be bulletproof. The game is obnoxious, and consequently, it's not worth playing. Just die! Next up, we have a ridiculously bad maze game where you can either get blasted to death by an unending wave of enemies, or wander around with no enemies and nothing to do. Everything is rendered in the smallest graphics possible, so if you're playing on a tiny CRT screen, like so many kids back in the day would have been, you're going to get eye strain just trying to work out where you are. I legitimately have no idea what the goal of this game is, and I'm not even sure the developers knew. Have I missed something, or is this game actually pointless? I know, let's check out the help screen. Maybe that'll explain things. What the... Is that a Nintendo Game Boy Advance? There's a Nintendo console on a Sony machine? It's almost too ridiculous to believe. But here's the thing. That's not the end of it. It's not just a picture of a Game Boy Advance because they forgot to change the graphic when they ported it from Game Boy Advance. These are actually Game Boy Advance games. Datel created a Game Boy emulator, stuck it on this thing, and then added 10 ROMs and sold it on a disc that Sony didn't even give them lockout chip licensing for. I'm not kidding. When you pick up the MaxPlay disc, it doesn't feel any different to a standard PS2 disc. But apparently it is. According to multiple sources, this is a spliced disc. The part that the PS2 reads to check whether a genuine PS2 disc is inserted was laser cut from a genuine PS2 game and attached to this disc, letting it play in all PlayStation 2 consoles. If that seems a little far-fetched to you, you're not alone because I'm in the same boat. I genuinely do not think they actually spliced these discs, although I'm not going to rule it out entirely, but just think about it. That would be very expensive. Datel produced the Action Replay, the Game Studio Game Boy player. Yes, you can play Game Boy games on a PlayStation 2 because Datel made some weird cartridge and a disc to go with it. They produced the DVD Region X, which is a way of getting around region locking when playing DVDs from your PlayStation 2. Do you really think they were splicing all of those discs? Or do you think they actually found a way to convince the PlayStation 2 that this was a genuine disc and used that system instead to save themselves some money and a load of disc time cutting out all of those pieces from other games? I think that's what happened. But here's the thing, we do actually know that Datel made their own Game Boy Advance emulator on the PlayStation 2, and we know which game they used to test it. How do we know this? Because it's still on the disc. This is Metroid Fusion. Yes, that Metroid Fusion. A ROM of this Nintendo classic is right here on the MaxPlay disc. Now normally it is inaccessible because it's stored in a file called Delete Me, but if you know what you're doing, you can rip it from the disc and put the game into any Game Boy Advance emulator where it'll play just fine. So we've got a Nintendo game here playing on a PlayStation 2. Surely Sony and Nintendo are two companies you don't want to mess with. They're going to be furious if this happened and they found out. How would they tell not sued into oblivion? Well, it turns out Sony have tried. They've sued Datel several times in fact, but these wily buggers, they still keep coming back. There's the time that Datel got sued in the 90s for accessing Sony's developer software via a login that they got from Interact Accessories, and the time Sony sued Datel for making a battery that would jump the PSP into factory mode, allowing you to run homebrew software. But weirdly, there doesn't seem to have been a lawsuit over this MaxPlay disc. So maybe Sony didn't notice? Were they just not made in that larger number? What's going on here? But I can tell you for certain, Nintendo mustn't have noticed, because Nintendo would have absolutely sued over a pirate copy of Metroid Prime being on this disc. Come on. But why didn't Nintendo find out about this? Well, turns out that Metroid Prime isn't on the GameCube version, so Nintendo wouldn't have seen it. And why wasn't it there? Probably because the discs for a Nintendo GameCube are about that big, and you can barely fit a game on them, never mind extras. But that's probably how it happened. So it was on the PlayStation 2 version, they cut it off for the GameCube version, but forgot PS2. So not only are these guys trying to make emulators and bypass the lockout stuff, they're also forgetful? My goodness. They dodged a massive bullet with this one. That's all I can say. Oh, but yeah, you should dodge a bullet too by not playing this crap game. Anyway, I've been Zoe Kirk Robinson. You've been watching GameHammer Classic Gaming here on the YouTube channel. Please do remember to like, comment, subscribe, all of that jazz, because it helps us not get eaten alive by the YouTube algorithm. And I'll see you next time. If you like the show, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help create future videos. That's patreon.com/Zoe Kirk Robinson. And I've got an extra special thanks going out to Chief89, Sam Yates, Retro Mickey 82, Mo Henry, and George Botterini. Thank you so much, guys.